Have you ever wondered what drives a person to kill? Is it rage, revenge, or something darker, a belief in a higher calling? In the shadows of Eastern Europe, two men, separated by country but bound by a chilling conviction, turned murder into a twisted form of ritual. But what makes them so dangerous isn't just their body count, it's the reason they killed. This is the story of Anatoly Onoprienko and Alexander Pichushkin, two of the deadliest serial killers in history. And the question remains, were they just monsters, or were they simply acting on a warped sense of destiny? Before we move on to the next part, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. Some murderers kill out of rage, others for greed. But there are a few who kill because they believe they were told to, by God, by fate, or by voices only they can hear. In Eastern Europe, two of the most chilling figures in criminal history stand out not only for their body count, but for the disturbing belief that their murders were not crimes, but missions. Anatoly Onoprienko, born in 1959 in Soviet Ukraine, claimed the lives of at least 52 people between 1989 and 1996. He often killed entire families in rural villages, entering homes at night and gunning down parents and children alike before setting the houses on fire. It wasn't about money. In fact, he left valuables untouched. Onoprienko said he was following orders from a higher power, describing himself as a chosen agent sent to carry out divine cleansing. He believed he was obeying a supernatural voice, and that each murder was necessary. Half a continent away, but just a decade later, another man emerged with a different approach, but a similar obsession. Alexander Pichushkin, born in Moscow in 1974, began killing in the early 2000s. He didn't storm houses or leave trails of fire. He invited people, usually the homeless or vulnerable, to drink with him in Bitsa Park. Once they let their guard down, he struck them from behind with a hammer and sometimes pushed them into a sewer shaft. He marked each kill by placing a coin or a token into one square of a chessboard, hoping to fill all 64. His motive? He said that murdering made him feel alive, and that each death kept him connected to his late grandfather, the only person he ever truly loved. Though their methods were starkly different, both men saw themselves as instruments. Onoprienko believed he was cleansing the earth. Pichushkin believed he was fighting off death itself. Neither showed remorse, neither tried to hide what they'd done when finally caught. What set them apart from many other killers was not just the number of victims, but the belief behind their actions, a belief that turned murder into ritual and killing into purpose. Still, their killings didn't just end lives, they unsettled entire nations. Ukraine, barely emerging from Soviet collapse, was haunted by the sudden, unexplained massacres in its countryside. Russia, too, was forced to reckon with the idea that a serial killer could move silently for years inside one of its largest cities, taking lives without anyone noticing. But who were these men, really? How did they operate? Were they madmen, or something more dangerous? Rational minds shaped by delusion? To understand their crimes, we have to move past the headlines and into the method, the mindset, and the chilling logic each one followed to the end. Anatoly Onoprienko didn't sneak through alleys or isolate individuals. He walked into homes. He killed entire families. One night in 1996, he entered a house in the village of Bratkovichi and slaughtered a couple, their 2 children, and the grandparents, 6 people in minutes. Then he set the place on fire. This wasn't an accident or a misfire. It was a method. He believed witnesses were a weakness. No one could be left behind. He repeated this pattern across western Ukraine, often striking in remote villages where response times were slow and fear spread faster than news. His weapon of choice ranged from shotguns to axes. He worked alone, he traveled light. He carried no personal items to trace him back. In his confession, he claimed that a voice, a force from above, ordered him to do it. He didn't act in rage, he didn't improvise. He followed what he saw as a divine blueprint. Alexander Pichushkin operated on a completely different frequency. He didn't need to move from place to place. Bitsa Park in Moscow was his hunting ground, and it was large enough to hide bodies, noise, and blood. He lured his victims, mostly alcoholics and pensioners, with vodka and the promise of companionship. Once they trusted him, he struck them with a hammer, usually at the back of the skull. Some he pushed alive into underground shafts. In a few cases, he inserted objects into the skull wounds, not to kill, but as a signature. This was not messy improvisation. This was routine. Over 5 years, from 2001 to 2006, he murdered at least 49 people. Some investigators believe the real number may exceed 60. For every life he took, he placed a token on his chessboard. He wasn't hiding his plan, he was documenting it. Psychologically, the two killers shared one critical trait: a total lack of remorse. Onoprienko called himself a robot, claiming his mind and hands belonged to something beyond him. He was cold, clinical, and when caught, he explained his killings not with panic, but with calm, flat certainty. Pichushkin, on the other hand, saw his crimes as creative output. He told police that not killing felt like losing oxygen. He needed it to feel awake. He viewed himself not as a monster, but as a man with a mission no one else could understand. He even expressed disappointment that his count hadn't reached 64, the full chessboard. But while Onoprienko's violence was explosive, large body counts, entire households wiped out, Pichushkin's danger lay in his patience. He didn't need speed, he needed time. He could disappear into Moscow's crowds, return to his job, greet neighbors, then vanish again into Bitsa's trees. This contrast is key. Onoprienko made headlines with massacre. Pichushkin made himself invisible. Both were methodical. Both were intelligent enough to avoid detection for years. Both used a twisted internal logic to justify the unjustifiable. But the way they framed their crimes tells us something crucial. Onoprienko externalized his violence. He blamed a higher power. Pichushkin internalized it. He believed murder was part of who he was, essential to his own sense of being. The more we look at how they operated, the clearer it becomes. Their crimes weren't random. They were practiced, refined, repeated. This wasn't madness in the traditional sense. It was a kind of moral collapse, built slowly and then carried out with stunning precision. When we think of serial killers, we often measure their danger by the body count. But that's only part of the story. The real danger lies not just in how many lives they took, but in how they affected the world around them, in the fear they instilled, the lives they shattered, and the lasting scars they left in their wake. Anatoly Onoprienko's reign of terror lasted just over 7 years, but it left deep marks on Ukraine's psyche. His killings were brutal, and his victims were often entire families, mothers, fathers, children, making the loss even more heartbreaking for their communities. As he killed and moved on, entire villages were left grieving, with no answers, no closure, only the chilling knowledge that their neighbor could be next. Onoprienko's modus operandi was designed to create chaos. He didn't leave behind clues, and his killings were often seemingly random, which made it difficult for authorities to predict or prevent. The coldness with which he executed his crimes, combined with his almost clinical approach, made his killings even more terrifying. People in rural Ukraine lived in constant fear of a man who seemed to appear and vanish without warning, making it nearly impossible to feel safe anywhere. The real horror was the unpredictability. a man who believed he was carrying out divine orders, with no hesitation and no remorse. His killings weren't simply murders, they were a message that no one was truly safe. In contrast, Alexander Pichushkin's crimes unfolded quietly, almost silently, within the vast expanse of Bitsa Park in Moscow. But his danger wasn't in the loudness of his acts, it was in his persistence and cunning. Pichushkin didn't need to strike quickly. He carefully chose his victims, taking time to plan each murder as part of a ritual. His chessboard, with each square representing a victim, was a twisted symbol of control. For Pichushkin, murder wasn't just about killing, it was about creating something, a game that only he understood. He made his victims feel as though they were part of something greater. He lured them in with promises of companionship and alcohol, a false sense of security that kept them from realizing the danger until it was too late. His ability to blend into everyday life made him even more dangerous. He could walk past you on the street, appear as just another face in the crowd, and yet, in his mind, he was already planning the next life to take. The real danger with Pichushkin wasn't that he was out of control, it was that he was so composed, so strategic. He had the patience to wait years to fill every square of his chessboard, and his chilling calmness throughout the process made him even more lethal. People in Moscow had no idea they were walking through the same park as a serial killer. They couldn't see him, hear him, or feel the terror building. This level of invisibility made him a silent predator, and perhaps even more terrifying than Onoprienko in some respects. Whereas Onoprienko's acts were loud and terrifying, Pichushkin's quiet, methodical killings instilled a kind of pervasive dread, a fear that perhaps no one would ever know how many lives he had taken. Despite their different methods, both killers left a lasting impact on their countries. Onoprienko's massacre-style killings created panic in rural Ukraine. People locked their doors, avoided traveling at night, and began to distrust even those closest to them. His reign of terror came at a time when Ukraine was struggling to find stability in the aftermath of the Soviet collapse. Onoprienko's violent acts became a symbol of the chaos, fear, and uncertainty that many felt during this period. Pichushkin, on the other hand, disrupted Moscow in a quieter way. His murders weren't committed in the spotlight, but in the shadows. His meticulous planning and patience showed a level of premeditation that made him one of Russia's most notorious killers. His victims never stood a chance, lured into a false sense of security before their lives were violently taken. The sense of unease he caused was deeper than the terror Onoprienko spread, because for years, no one knew who the killer was. There was no one to blame, no one to point to. Only the park, where death lurked behind every corner. Pichushkin's invisibility made him a different kind of threat, one that was hard to detect until it was too late. Onoprienko and Pichushkin both manipulated their environment to suit their needs, but the way they did so speaks to a larger pattern in criminal behavior. Onoprienko relied on chaos, fear, and divine justification, using violence to force a warped sense of order. Pichushkin, on the other hand, played a more psychological game, creating an almost eerie calm around his murders. His kills were not about rage, they were about control, about completing a puzzle that only he could understand. In the end, both men were caught. Onoprienko was arrested in 1996 and Pichushkin in 2006. The true horror of Anatoly Onoprienko and Alexander Pichushkin isn't just in the number of lives they took, but in the way they justified their actions. Onoprienko believed he was carrying out divine orders, while Pichushkin thought he was completing a twisted puzzle. Their killings didn't just terrorize their victims, they terrified entire nations, leaving behind fear that still lingers today. These men weren't just killers, they were driven by a warped sense of purpose, making them even more unpredictable and dangerous. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the minds of the world's most notorious criminals. But here's a question for you. Can someone like Pichushkin or Onoprienko ever be fully understood, or are they simply too far gone into their own delusions? Let us know what you think in the comments below.